Welcome to the Criminologist podcast. Our goal here is to educate and enlighten our listeners, focusing on the latest and greatest evidence-based interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. And not only those factors which drive folks into crime, we also look at the reasons why people exit a life of crime. Also, we attempt to paint an accurate picture of that journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individual. Too often, our perceptions of those involved in the system are tainted by media-driven caricatures created to sell newspapers or movie tickets. This adds little to a healthy dialogue as to how to best address criminality. This podcast will avoid stereotypes and biases. We will endeavor to accomplish the first two goals in a way that keep you, the listener, interested and even entertained. And now, the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Thank you. Hello, and welcome to episode 48 of the Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. Back to our fictitious caseload of clients for this episode, we are going to be joined by client Mia Wallace, who we have not heard from in a while. After last week's episode in which I talked about Shad Maruna's 6 steps of behavioral transformation and how ideally we could leverage those 6 steps to promote desistance as opposed to the way the criminal justice system currently uses those steps to promote persistence in offending, I decided to have a little fun with this episode. I was inspired a bit by Fergus McNeil and his book, Pervasive Punishment. Great book. If you have not read it, go out and do so as soon as you can. At any rate, for a portion of that book, Fergus paints a picture of what future probation supervision may look like. So as I was reflecting on how to operationalize the 6 steps of transformation to augment desistance with our caseload of justice-involved individuals, I continued to catch myself thinking, well, if we had a time machine, it could jump into the future to see how perhaps these 6 steps may look at some point in the years to come. That would be ideal. And then I thought to myself, well, you don't need a time machine, Joe. You have a podcast. Go ahead, take some creative liberties, and do a fantasy episode or two that takes place in the future. We can still return to our present day with our caseload, but I thought this would be a good way to illustrate how someday we may use the 6 steps of transformation for the better. Again, as opposed to the way we sadly use them now. That is to say, degradation ceremonies and the labeling and how, again, we sort of do this in a bizarro backwards world. To recap those 6 steps, and again, I encourage you to go back and listen to episode 47, where I outline these 6 steps. But to recap those 6 steps of transformation one more time, they were step 1, the apprenticeship or journey. Step 2, the ceremony. Step number 3, credentialism. Step number 4, renaming. Step number 5, creation of an exclusive subculture. And step number 6, the internalizing, also known as self-labeling. Again, please go back and listen to last week's episode if you've not yet done so to get the best experience out of this episode. And with that, allow me to bring you my WandaVision style episode, if you will, of what a glimpse into the future could look like for our client, Mia Wallace. Now, when I looked at step 1, which is, again, the apprenticeship or journey, I struggled somewhat with how I would craft a dialogue for Mia and I to reflect her journey towards desistance while on supervision. And so for the first step, let's just imagine all of her accomplishments on probation. For example, earning her associate's degree, maintaining sobriety, gainful employment. As you're about to hear, Mia's on the cusp of starting a family. That is, just as she learned how to be a criminal or a persister in her formative years, she's now learned how to be a desister. Listen then for steps 2 through 6 in the following vignette as I bring you a futuristic look at the life of a desisted Mia Wallace. Here we are, Mia, celebrating another milestone for you on supervision. I'm starting to lose track of all these graduation ceremonies I've attended as your probation officer.
Well, you may have lost track, but trust me, I have not. You really have no idea how much it's meant to me over the years when I look out at the crowds or, sometime lack thereof, but to see your face out there attending.
Mia, of all the tools we have at our disposal, whether my colleagues refer to them as core correctional practices or core correctional skills, by far the most satisfying for me is getting out from behind my desk and showing up to support you and your accomplishments.
That's so nice of you to say.
Plus, today, of course, is the one we've been working on for so long, your official judicial rehabilitation ceremony. You must be so proud. Are you a bit nervous as well?
Not gonna lie, yeah, a little bit. I mean, although I think part of it is the memories of being in this courtroom for some, not so fun things, like my sentencing, all those probation violation hearings, when I was first starting out on supervision. So do they do that on purpose?
Good eye. And yes, they do, in fact, Mia. Now that the team has deemed you to be, quote, rehabilitated, the thought is that to better counter all the bad things you experienced in this building, and in fact, this very courtroom, it would be appropriate to have your judicial rehabilitation ceremony here as well. So sort of our way of undoing some of the crappy things that were instilled in you and what I call those status degradation ceremonies.
Status degradation ceremonies? Ow, is that official language?
No, not exactly. But if you think about it, what did you experience every time you were in this courtroom before? Why did we all gather here with all this decorum and tradition and officialness?
Yeah, it was like ceremonial, that's for sure. I mean, you guys did a good job of making sure it felt that way, at least.
Oh, yes, we did. And again, what were we celebrating?
My screw-ups?
Yeah, exactly. Every time we gathered in this courtroom in the past, it's been to celebrate your screw-ups, right? Not your accomplishments, but your F-ups.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but you're right. I always have bad memories of coming into this building or even driving past it.
Well, that is why I call these hearings status degradation ceremonies. They don't have the effect of celebrating you or bringing you up. They really just celebrate your failures.
Boy, I'm sure glad you did not tell me this earlier in my period of supervision.
I would never do such a thing. In fact, I'm only telling you this now since you're reaching this milestone on your journey, Mia. We try our best to approach these events as a delabeling ceremony. That is, to undo some of the negative effects of the repeated labeling that took place in this very courtroom over the years. Labeling you a convicted felon, labeling you a probation violator, more than once I might add, and of course, all of the unintended consequences of reinforcing that identity into you, offender, convict, probation failure. Now, after all that you've done to earn this judicial rehabilitation certificate, we want to do all we can do to undo some of that damage, which is why part of this ceremony will entail a short presentation on all you've done on your journey towards desistance.
Aww, I blush easily.
I know you do, but you're just going to have to suck it up. Now, just sit back, relax, and get ready to be celebrated. And let's hope the judge is on time. All right, I will talk to you after the ceremony. Hey, there she is. Congratulations. How does it feel to be recognized as an officially rehabilitated person?
Not gonna lie, I was a bit nervous, especially when they asked me to speak. Not my strong suit, but did I sound okay? I hope I didn't make a fool of myself.
Just the opposite, Mia. Not a dry eye in the house. It was very touching, actually. And thank you for those kind words, by the way.
I meant every word of it. So I did not realize they were going to do the expungement today as well. That was kind of cool.
Yeah, they used to do that in a prior hearing, but it was felt that it was much more impactful if we bundled it all together with this judicial rehabilitation ceremony. Again, we spent years building up your criminal credential in this courthouse. We thought it was the least we could do to erase, at least as best we could, through expungement.
It was a really nice surprise. And then I also got this.
Oh, of course. Your official certificate of good conduct. You're going to be busy finding a place to proudly display that.
Now, is it true that I can use that at a future job interview or stuff like that if they ask me about my criminal history?
These certificates legally carry weight. The intention is that they offset previous discrimination you may have faced due to your past. Technically, that certificate of good conduct shields you from that type of bias that you may have experienced while wandering the earth as a convicted felon.
Funny you say wandering the earth, because I did feel like a zombie at times, the undead, part of this world, yet not really accepted. I don't know, a vampire or something.
Well, those days of hiding in the shadows are over for you, young Mia Wallace. Time to come out and walk in the sunlight with the living. Consider this your non-criminal credential. Although we should stop even using that word, shouldn't we?
Criminal? Yeah, exactly. And please don't say ex-con. That is not exactly a ringing endorsement. Hey, did you hear about the new woman who moved in the building? I heard she had a record. No, she's off supervision now. Just an ex-con. Oh, an ex-con? Now I feel so much better. You see my point?
Yeah, I get it. We can do better than that. I guess society and the English language have some work to do in that regard. Okay, so not ex-con. How's this? You are a woman of convictions.
I love it. It's a nice double meaning. Perfect. Okay, so along those lines, please tell me if you think this sounds stupid, but I've been thinking a lot about this lately. All of my arrest records, the probation agreements, the official documents, they refer to me as Mia Wallace, and I am looking at this as kind of a transformation in my life and wondering if you think it'd be silly for me to leave Mia, behind and start going by another first name.
Oh, I think that is a stupendous idea. Symbolic of this new chapter in your life, right? Now, I'm dying to hear what have you come up with.
I've been thinking about it a lot, and I've narrowed it down to Mimi or maybe even Miami.
Oh, you gotta go with Miami. Are you kidding me? No question. And yeah, I love where you're going with this. I know you won't relate to this movie. I'm an old timer, but in Platoon, Charlie Sheen's character goes through a metamorphosis over in Vietnam, and at one point his fellow soldiers introduce him to the rest of the platoon and say, "Oh, Taylor's dead. This here's Chris." So now what I'm hearing is, "Oh, Mia's dead. This here's Miami." And Miami has a whole new identity from that of Mia. Am I right?
100%. Miami is a totally different person, which is not to say Mia has any apologies to make. In fact, Miami wouldn't be here if it weren't for Mia.
That's right. You are just moving further down your pathway. So, any big plans to celebrate tonight? I see your husband here in the audience. He taking you out to dinner or anything like that?
Actually, we do have a little gathering at our house later on. Some friends, family, coworkers coming over just for some cake and coffee. I told him I didn't want to make a big fuss of it, but he insisted. He said, it's not every day that someone receives their judicial rehabilitation certificate, so you can be darn sure we're going to celebrate.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Did he really say darn?
Yeah, he did.
He doesn't have much correctional experience, does he?
No, and that's why I love him so much.
All kidding aside, I'm glad you're getting the spotlight you deserve tonight, Mia. And also sounds like I'm not the only one. You have some coworkers, neighbors, family, all supporting you as well, which we know was not always the case for folks completing their probation supervision.
Right? I could not imagine not having their support. All of them. In many ways, the feeling of inclusion was really key for me, as opposed to early on in my life of crime when it was all about society excluding me in so many ways.
Miami, I am so proud of how far you have come.
Correction, Joe? How far we have come.
Oh, you are too kind. I just have to ask, when you look in the mirror or listen to that voice in your head, who do you see? Who do you hear talking to you?
It's definably not the same person who sat in your office. I mean, definitely, sorry. But during the first visit we had after my sentencing, it's way different. I mean, it's not the high school dropout, welfare scamming, cut every corner I could, rules, breaking everything with all those years. Like, now it's a college graduate, I'm a wife, I'm a homeowner, a career woman, looking to start my family. I mean, I literally see myself like that now.
You might even say how you identify.
You certainly could say that, sir.
I don't want to keep you from your loved ones, Miami. This is normally where we schedule our next visit, but those days are no more, I'm afraid.
Oh, handshakes are not going to cut it. Bring it in for a hug.
Careful, all these years in corrections have made me fragile. Okay, let's take a look at those 6 steps again and see how we did. Step 1, apprenticeship or journey. As I alluded to earlier, we sort of have to plug in there what it would have been like for Mia after years of supervision, learning pro-social identity, augmenting her social capital, augmenting her human capital, and again, really going down that pathway towards desistance, just how she, in hindsight, started dabbling in delinquency and dipped her toe into persistence. We were just sort of rounding out her trajectory, if you will, there over, again, years of awesome supervision. Specifically in this little vignette, though, we really heard, I feel, steps 2 through 6. The ceremony, again, you heard in that episode, we referred to court proceedings as status degradation ceremonies. Reflect, though, on the ceremonies in your life, whether it was your high school graduation ceremony, your marriage ceremony. We use ceremony to really mark milestones in life and to celebrate those. So again, trying here to undo some of the status degradation ceremonies that many justice-involved individuals experience over their years of supervision. Again, the credentialing, we do a good job currently in the criminal justice system of credentialing folks with that convicted felon credential or you're an offender credential. And again, one which really officially and legally, if you will, allows society to discriminate against individuals, as in, we're not going to rent to you or hire you because you have this criminal credential. So in this episode, we were trying to undo that by certifying, if you will, Mia in handing out her judicial rehabilitation certificate, her expungement that we surprised her with. And then, if you also caught it, we threw in her certificate of good conduct. Again, trying to undo some of the damage of you're certified as a convicted felon or you're certified as an adjudicated juvenile, etc., etc., etc. And as I just noted when I referenced her new moniker of Miami, again, thought I'd have some fun here and how could we explore that renaming, if you will? Again, in previous episodes, we talked about how other institutions and entities use the renaming to great effect in the 6-step process. So I thought, to really illustrate the point, let's have her take on a new name of, as you heard, Miami versus Mia, sort of symbolic of the metamorphosis that she was going through. And then I tried my best with step 5, the exclusive subculture. Again, in the desistance approach, we really want to create a sense of inclusion within mainstream society, if you will. That's why, for example, I threw in the after party that Mia was hosting at her house, and talking about, neighbors, coworkers, family, to sort of try to illustrate that she is being embraced by society and no longer looked at as an outcast, if you will. And then for the final step, step 6, internalizing or self-labeling. Again, if you caught it, I tried to evoke from Mia and ask her, hey, who do you see when you look in the mirror? Or who do you hear when that little voice in your head talks to you? And she wasn't saying, as she did previously, that she sees herself or that she identifies as the convicted felon. And again, she was on for fraudulent, obtaining welfare fraudulently. She doesn't see herself as a scammer anymore, or a convict, or somebody who cuts corners whenever they can. She sees herself, as you heard, as a wife, an employee, a college graduate, maybe even contemplating motherhood, which is another huge identity transformation. Parenthood for the mothers and fathers. Parenthood, and that's why parenthood, we really see at times, is a catalyst for individuals desisting from crime. And as any of you listening who are parents can relate to, your identity changed when you became a parent. That's a great illustration of how impactful that change could be in driving your identity. And with it, it also drove your behavior. You start behaving differently when you're a parent. And a lot of that has to do with how you identify. So again, trying to get from Mia how she's internalizing or self-labeling now that she is desisted, again, in our futuristic vignette here. Huge thanks to my friend Robin Beta for voicing the character of Mia Wallace for us once again. Also, I drew heavily in this session, as I've been saying all along, from the works of Dr. Shad Maruna, and also some inspiration from Fergus McNeil from his book, Pervasive Punishment. Back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to evidence-based practices and or implementation science, or, of course, the topic of desistance from crime. I will leave a link in this episode description that will lead you directly to the Paragon Group, LLC.com. If you have questions, feel free to contact the show directly via our email, thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook page and our Instagram page at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. I encourage you to follow the Criminologist Media Group on Twitter at Crim Media Group. Again, our Twitter handle is Crim Media Group. There you'll find the latest updates and related content for both this podcast and our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. You can also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Lastly, if you've not already done so, subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional content as to what you've heard here on this podcast. Merchandise is available. If you're interested, reach out. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, please spread the word, become part of the movement, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us, ask them to subscribe to the show, and of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
If we could somehow harness this lightning, channel it into the flux capacitor, sending you back to the future.
The Criminologist podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, training opportunities, or to contact the host, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. Click on the Contact Us tab in the upper right-hand side of the page. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.
The thoughts, statements, and opinions of the host and cast members do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers and are those of the host and cast themselves. Any discussion regarding client statements, behaviors, actions, or crimes are purely fictional and are used only for the purposes of example. Any examples that could be deemed to be related to an actual individual or individuals are incidental.